Hello, I'm Laurie Arnold. I am the NCBFAA Secretary, and I'll be moderating a panel of our legal counsel. I have with us Lenny Feldman, Cindy Thomas, Cole Bivens Collinson, and Ashley Craig. So we'll get started. Cole, I'll start with you. What legislation affecting trade do you see coming for 2026, and how can the NCBFAA either support or attempt to work for any of those changes?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Laurie. My title is I serve as the legislative advisor for the NCBFAA. So that's why we're asking about legislation. There's one bill definitely that we see moving. It has not yet been introduced, but it has to do with non-resident importers. There's going to be a change where non-resident importers are no longer allowed to act as importers of record. NCBFA has not taken a position for this or against it, recognizing that there are members who work with lots of legitimate, very viable non-resident importers. They are completely reliable. And we realize also that there are others who don't work with those. So this would have minimal impact. However, the issue that we see right now that we're trying to address is it is going forward. What NCBFAA has done is to work with those who are drafting it to make it as workable as possible. One of the things that NCBFAA absolutely would like to see is if there is a country that gives non-resident importer status to U.S. companies, then we should do that. It's the idea of reciprocity. This is very, I would say, symbiotic with the administration's position, which has been reciprocity, right? Reciprocal tariffs, reciprocal treatment. So if there are other countries who might treat us this way, we want to make sure that we're giving them that same treatment. So right now, that really only includes Canada and Australia. But this could encourage other countries to maybe change their laws to allow U.S. companies to be non-resident importers as well. So we've worked with that. The other thing that we wanted to make sure doesn't happen, which I'm sure all of you have had your fill of dealing with this past year, is something being announced at Friday afternoon at 5:30 and going into effect on Monday morning. And that short time frame really is difficult. If you can imagine, if suddenly all these people who are non-resident importers lose their ability to import on a Friday evening, and there's all these goods on the water, in the air, about to be entered, crossing the borders, it's going to stop it up. The magnitude could be absolutely horrific. So there has to be some time frame in there. And we worked to get as long a process that the drafters of the bill that we saw going forward would accept, which is a year. So we're trying to allow a year transition period, which gives companies who, and like I say, you all work with so many legitimate companies who are not resident in the U.S., gives them time to be able to become importers of record registered in the United States and gets set up according to the law. So we're working. We know that bill is going to be introduced. We want to, again, it's not a position of NCBFA supporting it or opposing it, but if it's going to go forward, we want to make sure that it's going to be workable for as many of our members and your clients as possible. So that's our initiative and how we're working on that. That I think we could see coming as soon as this month. There could be something introduced in the next couple of weeks. The other piece of legislation that actually is an NCBFAA initiated that we are working to get introduced is what we're calling the ADAPT law. And this is the Advanced Direction for Adjusted, I forgot what the other is, Adjusted Amendments to Tariffs. So what it is saying is if there are any adjustments that are made to the tariffs pursuant to 201, 301, 232, 22, 338, any of these adjustments that might be coming down the pike, that there be 30 days before they go into effect. And that at least 2 weeks before the effective date, CBP has issued its CSMS to the ports. So we have some idea of how to comply so that the vendors have time to, so that CBP has time to adjust its system. So the vendors have time. So you have time. So maybe if there's questions we see, we have time to ask them of this. We've gotten, when you folks were in town or whenever the NCBFAA folks were in town during September, we mentioned this, as a problem and how, everyone wants to comply, but whenever you don't know the rules, it's difficult to comply. And so giving that advance notice would be significant. Many of the offices said, give us language. So we're like, Okay, so we drafted some language. We've been circulating it, and we're looking right now to find bipartisan co-sponsors to introduce the bill. And so hopefully we're able to move that next year as well. As far as any other bills that might impact trade, we could see potentially the extension of the AGOA and the extension of the Haiti Hope bill. There is a Nepal program for textiles and apparel. I don't know that it's going to be extended. It expires at the end of this year. I've not seen anyone really bring it up. I don't know that it will therefore be extended. Those, I think, could move again, potentially. We might see movement, at least in the trade subcommittee this month, maybe movement before the full committee in January. Possibly, we have January 30th, the funding for some of our government agencies expires. Maybe we see it move then. But those are really the only things I see moving. I just don't see a whole lot of other legislation moving very quickly.
Thanks, Nicole. I can tell you as a broker, the ADAPT bill is very important to us. Getting the updates on a Friday at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night with them going into play on Monday morning are nearly impossible to get correct. So we appreciate that one for sure. Cindy, she's our PGA counselor. Cindy, how do you see the PGA engagement playing out next year with so many knowledgeable long-term staff either retiring or taking the buyouts?
Well, that may be one of the most disheartening aspects of this past year has been just, so many experienced people who we've relied upon leaving, going out the door. And it's not just the loss of these particular people, but it's how abrupt it's occurring. There is not an orderly flow of or transition to a new generation who have been trained or mentored to take over, which is the normal course of events. So a lot of agencies are struggling with that. And so, of course, the REC is struggling with that. But, at the quickly realized that we had to really throw away the playbook and just we needed to improvise and adapt to this new normal this year. And it's really varied agency by agency. And I think the groundwork we've laid will carry us on through to 2026. But the irony is that some agencies actually have doubled down on outreach. And agencies like APHIS realize that they have, fewer staff, they're short staffed, they're short on money, they need us. And so we found sometimes them coming to us and reaching out, and we've developed some really good engagement, which kind of surprised us. And I think they realized we could be, as we always say, force multipliers where we can reach tens of thousands of importers. So we find them using us as a conduit to reach those importers. So it's really fostering good relationships in some of the agencies who have, had the wisdom of those staff remaining to see this. Other agencies are, like EPA are floundering. They've lost a lot of people and their mission is kind of uncertain. So, but even in that, we see opportunities and possibilities for opening. And I think, we see that, and they see we have things to teach them. We encountered one situation where at Agricultural Marketing Service, they had a new guy heading the produce grading and inspection program. And we sought him out, requested a meeting, and realized in this initial meeting that he knew nothing about trade processes or brokers or supply chains. And kind of it scared us at first, but this guy he was sort of acknowledged that this was not what his background is, but he was determined to learn it. And he asked us to do it for a demo of what a custom broker does and really did his homework and now is coming to us with all kinds of ideas. And so that's kind of a good story. And so we see in the midst of all of this chaos and loss of experience, we also see this resilience coming from the PGAs and that there are people there who want to make their programs work. And so we're taking every opportunity we can to kind of go with that and be there and lead them to better solutions and problem solving.
That's good to hear that he was open to wanting to learn and reached out to NCBFAA for that, because I think this is definitely the group to help him for sure. So I hope that the other PGAs continue to stay engaged and listen openly. So that's good. With the changes with the government's constantly trying to implement something and then suspending something, Ashley, our Transportation Counsel, where do you see the BIS 50% rule going for next year after this 1-year suspension?
Thank you for the opportunity. It's always nice to reflect on what we've seen the last 12 months and engage in some conjecture and speculation. Looking forward to the new year. And I'm very pleased to be surrounded by such amazing colleagues and competent counsel, including Lenny, of course. But having said that, come on, Lenny, you got to smile a little bit. The BIS 50%, 50% rule is a significant step from an enforcement perspective from a U.S. government angle forward. We understand why BIS decided to do it. They did not take it lightly. It took quite some time to get to that. Keeping in mind that we obviously have been operating within the 50% plus one rule from an OFAC sanctions perspective for a very long time. But fortunately, I think that regulators decided that for a variety of reasons, including some concern raised by the trade, suspension of the BIS implementation and enforcement of the affiliate rule was necessary, practical, and prudent. We also know that it was a byproduct of the U.S.-Sino trade negotiations, which resulted in this framework, which we're still waiting to see the particulars and the details, which is very part and parcel to the way this administration, quote, negotiates trade deals. They strike a framework and then they dive into the details after the announcement of the deal itself, which could require months and months of post-agreement negotiation. But again, the affiliate rule was suspended in part because of concerns raised by our friends in Beijing, as well as the trade community. This gives us time also from an intermediary perspective, 3PL, forwarder, broker, NBO, IAC, to get our ducks in a row. There was great concern raised, and I will tip my hat to the export subcommittee here, led by Donna and Kim primarily, but so many others from within the association that have stepped up, raising concerns. We did draft comments. We submitted comments. And again, fortunately, there was a suspension granted. But to your core question, Laurie, I think that we will find ourselves inevitably, whether it's 12 months, 14, 16, or 24 down the road, at a place where the rule will go live. And it's going to impact how we operate, how you operate. The most significant change is going to be, not only do you need to know your customer, but, and this is where I think the government doesn't fully appreciate what you do as third parties, brokers, forwarders, NBOs, IX, et cetera. To what extent do they want to hold us liable and responsible for drilling down and getting to know who's who in the chain of custody? I can tell you from experience with the OFAC rule with regards to BCOs and proprietary cargo owners and operators, depending upon the size of the company and the resources available, you typically have to bring in third-party assets to conduct that type of due diligence. And that's what it is. Ultimately, it becomes due diligence. And I do think that we should use this time to continue to advocate and to create further awareness within USG as to the special status of the intermediary, and that there are limitations that need to be acknowledged from a government and a regulator perspective. Again, tip of the hat to the export subcommittee for that work. We had great conversations with BIS in September around the GAC. That was actually something that I was a little surprised we got, given this environment and where we are and the fact that we have many political spots still vacant. But those conversations were constructive, and they have been for a number of years going back multiple administrations. So I guess to round out on your question, we should prepare for the inevitable, which is that it's going to come back and it will be live at some point. I would be surprised and pleasantly surprised if the government decides to reverse course and pull it back completely. I don't think that's where we're going to find ourselves. It's a further extension. It also reflects this administration's approach to export controls, export enforcement, sanctions enforcement. Those are all increasing across the board. So the affiliate 50% BIS rule is a further example of that. So again, to sum up, let's use this 12-month period to further engage with U.S. government regulators, policymakers, influencers, and drive home the unique status and capability of the intermediary, and acknowledging that there are certain limitations that need to be acknowledged by the government's perspective on what we can and cannot do. But prepare is, I guess, the watchword here.
Yeah, so as a reporter, we appreciate the communication with the government and explaining to them how difficult this will be for us, and to, maybe realize that we're in a different area to be able to do that as effectively as the client can, the exporter can. Any or
Laura, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Laurie, can I
please.
comment for just a second? Thanks. Everything Ashley said is absolutely correct. The one thing I did just want to add is that after the administration postponed this 50% rule for a year, the chair and the ranking member of the committee, the select committee on the CCP, issued a public statement not happy with that. They had issued a statement earlier asking that this be done. The administration had done it. Now they've postponed it. Congress has now come back and they're very not happy with the administration for postponing it. It is possible that Congress is going to try to introduce legislation that would effectuate the same thing. Now, again, we see how slowly bills actually move. Will it happen? I'm not sure, but I think we could. That is another area where we might see something introduced by Congress to try to get them to go back to the 50% rule. So it's not gone yet, even though it might be on pause for a year. Just letting you know that it could resurface.
And if I may, that's
then.
an excellent point, Nicole. Thank you for flagging it. There's a huge focus, obviously, on U.S.-China trade, and there always has been, and there always will. But the 50% rule bleeds across all transactions. It's not just China, but there's a huge emphasis, as you just heard from Nicole, on U.S.-China trade, for that matter, and due diligence. And it ranges from not only just knowing who you're dealing with, but also, for example, UFLPA enforcement and forced labor concerns too. So I would not be surprised, to Nicole's point, if we see bipartisan support for legislative action to move this thing forward and force the hand of the administration. Having said that, Congress has been very calculating, if you will, in how it deals with the administration. And I guess maybe defer to Nicole, this is her subject matter, but high level of deference from the Republicans in the House and the Senate to the administration. Let's just see what happens here.
More thing to worry about, right? Lenny, our Customs Counsel and General Counsel, with all the tariff changes in 2025, what do you think we can expect in 2026 from the current administration?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for that question, Laurie, and thanks for moderating us today. And of course, a shout out to Lalo and Simply Trade for hosting us. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to participate. And I really like this unique forum of being able to share this opportunity with our esteemed co-counsels. I think we, as you could see, have so many issues that have been presented before us, and it really takes more than a village just to address all of them, and customs has been no exception. I would be remiss if initially, first off, I didn't shout out the outstanding work of Sandy Cody and Ralph De La Rosa, who co-chair our customs committee. I mean, these people, both of them deserve a badge, a medal of honor for all the work that they've done. I've done my best with our team at Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg, with Nicole, and the folks here with us today to support them. But they really have been running with so many questions. They just had a webinar this week, for example, and they had over 800 people just talking about the modernization of payments and the funds to the notified parties and how that's proceeding to be automated. And that's one of the things I will try to start on a positive note that I see from the administration. They are seemingly supportive of more technology, more AI. And I think as an industry, we really need to keep our eye on that. We've been asked by CBP, in fact, to provide ideas and concepts to AI. What is that going to look like in the future? How does that work in the brokerage and forwarding industry? How is CBP using it? And I think the administration came out quite strong and felt, well, we could just automate the entire trade process. Let's just find some software providers, and they're going to be able to help us classify and value and conduct origin in a way that will be seamless. And I think CBP and the trade community have done a good job in articulating that It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect unless you have human beings, you have licensed customs brokers, freight forwarders who are really managing the process and the automation. So that's actually something we're going to continue to keep our eye on. But Laurie, when it comes to the administration, I kind of look at it in different parts and buckets. You have, of course, the White House and the departmental level. You have CBP and other agencies that we work with. And you have, of course, the people who are making decisions day in and day out in the field and in the centers. And all of them play a very critical role. We've been working this year with not only CBP, but also with Department of Commerce, the U.S. Trade Representative, Department of Homeland Security and Treasury, because they all have pieces to this puzzle. And for the first time, we've found that it's very important to interface with Commerce because of the twos and to see how they have been implementing those. As Nicole mentioned, it was August 15th when they told us that 750 subheadings were going to be provided as part of the inclusion tariffs, and they gave us till Monday, which was not even a work day. We went in there and we said, hey, look, we need more time. We need notification so that it's not just a day, but a month. And at least we were able to get 2 weeks so that for the 232s when it came to the timber and the lumber. So that was the start. But to Nicole's point, we need legislation. We need the ADAPT bill to be passed to do that. Do we expect to see more than that? I'm going to have to say yes in 2026. I think we have to be on the lookout for more of these sectoral twos coming out. We see that that's a trend. We've seen pharmaceutical. We see investigations with a whole host of commodities. And if, in fact, the Supreme Court rules against the president's authorization for the tariffs under the IEEPA, the president is definitely going to eye 232 from a sectoral standpoint, as well as 122 and 338, which were already mentioned. But I think those sectoral pieces are something that's going to have to really be a focus for the industry. And those are challenging because at first, if you remember, we had folks saying, well, maybe we want to be classified in the steel and aluminum provision because they were on the exclusion or exemption appendix. And then that quickly shifted. So it's really a revolving door as to the naughty or nice list, as I say, on that exemption list, which I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think we're also going to see more of these deals. I don't call them trade agreements. I was a proud negotiator of the NAFTA in the 1990s, portions of it, and that took years to negotiate. Nicole was involved in those negotiations and discussions as well as we have been on subsequent agreements, not only when we worked at the government, but also for our clients and associations we've represented. We're seeing these deals popping up, 10, 15% tariffs, that if you're under the 15%, then your reciprocal is going to get you to the 15% tariff. But if you're over 15%, that might just be your tariff that will include your base as well as the reciprocal. So I think we're going to have to be ready for those. We're seeing that now with South Korea, right? That's kind of the most recent flavor of that. So I think that that's something we're going to be seeing. As far as moving down kind of the ladder to CBP, I'm going to say that it's going to be the E word, enforcement. We've already started to see that. E word previously was e-commerce. That's still going to be in play, but E is going to be enforcement. And I say that because if you look at just one statistic, and I raise this just about any time I have the opportunity to do so because it's so telling. In fiscal year 2024, CBP collected about $670 million in duties or tariffs based on entry summary reviews. And this year so far, they've collected close to $35 billion in entry summary reviews. Can I just take that in for a second? $670 million to over $32 billion in entry summary reviews. You know what that means? They have the right to go back potentially to all of those importers and say, we've collected the duties, but per the executive orders indicating that this is going to be an opportunity for straight out enforcement and no mitigation, here's your penalty for getting it wrong. Now, we have been speaking with CBP executives who say, we understand it's difficult. There needs to be informed compliance. But at this point, there's still mistakes being made. Laurie, we, for example, have gone back and forth and the email box has been flooded. I saw your email. I've seen others, which I haven't gotten back to. How do we value the steel and aluminum content? For Pete's sake, are we simply going to take the invoice price from that steel aluminum manufacturer and then we're good to go and the subsequent processing doesn't have to be included? The Center of Excellence is maybe telling us something different, but what we're seeing on the FAQ still says that's appropriate. There's complete confusion, paralysis there until we get clear definition, really clear guidance on that. And this is just one prevalent example where we're ripe for enforcement or some type of correction in the year to come. And finally, I think that takes you to the field, right? It takes you to the centers of excellence and expertise, which, by the way, our committee, our customs committee, prides itself on meeting with the centers regularly and trying to partner with them the best we can to make sure that messaging is clear. When you're getting that 28 or 29, does that mean that it's really a precursor for an investigation, or you're just getting that letter of investigation? I think in this coming year, you're going to see a lot more LOIs or letters of investigation coming out without the 28 or 29. You're going to see a lot of those 1592s coming out to be very surprising. So the broker is going to play a very critical role, even more so, I think, in the coming year as to where we're going to see all of that being played out and where it's going to lead us. So it's been quite an eventful year. I'll close just by saying, if any of you are on Spotify the way I am, we've been looking with friends and family, what was your song of the year? What was the age of the genre that you were looking at? I came out of somebody who loves album-oriented rock. I didn't know that's what it was called, but very appropriate. That's kind of the 70s, 80s, like big rock, the real solid sound there that we all love. And it made me think of maybe my song for 2026 would be Boston's Don't Stop Believin', because you got to have hope. But I got to say that I go back maybe to the Beatles. It's been a hard day's night and I've been working like a dog. That would probably be even more appropriate if I could go back to genres. Hopefully, I think we understand that we need to expect the unexpected, but really be ready for that enforcement, be ready for those surprises. And I'm hopeful too that we'll have a little bit better notification of what comes down the pipe. But in those sectoral 232 tariffs and those deals, it's going to be fast and furious for the distant future.
Thanks, Lenny. It has been a very difficult year. As a broker, I don't think we've put in nearly as many hours as this year as we've done, in the past. It's just been crazy. So, and I do hope that Customs can get on the same page and give us good guidance, because it is contradicting on the steel from what the center sent out yesterday. So that's a little confusing, but hopefully. Sydney, I had another question. The new CPSC regulations coming out that are effective, I believe, June 2026, July
8th.
July 8th. So what should importers and brokers consider doing now? I've actually had a couple of clients myself reaching out to me and asking, and I'm not sure yet what to tell them.
Well, the very first thing you should do is go to the RAC webpage, CPSC Toolkit. I'll give a shout out for our RAC team now, Mike Lahar, the chairman, and Adam Lees, the vice chair, and our CPS subcommittee, Michelle Pierce, and with help from a member of the subcommittee, Monica DeMars, have really been trying to provide strong resources in that toolbox and engaging with CPSC all the time. But the long and the short of it, you have to engage now, because there's a webinar on that toolkit, which we've actually made the link where you can share it with importers. And it had the webinar was done with a broker and an importer on the panel, and just talking in real practical terms. And after hearing that, if that doesn't get importers' attention, nothing will, because the particular importer, who is from the Family Dollar store and has been working on this for 2 years, and the fact that there's only not quite 6 months to prepare, people have to engage now. And a custom broker should be reaching out to, looking at what products their importers are handling. So many of them fall under CPSC guidelines. And we have the tentative list right now of tariff headings that would apply. And so you can match that up against your client's products and pull them out and get in touch with the importers and asking them how are they doing it? Because it's not a one size fits all. They have a lot of options. And for the broker, if your importer does not choose to get involved with the product registry, which is CPSC has, you will be doing a very lengthy message set. If they do the product registry, all you'll have to do is provide just a certificate number and one other data element. So it is to our benefit to have folks see the value of the product registry. If it, not all importers will want to do that, but anyway. So I say visit our look at the webinar and look at the resources, and then the RAC continues to say, send us your questions and your importers' questions, and we're going to CPSC to get answers.
Excellent. I didn't know that I actually did listen in on that webinar. I wasn't aware that it was something that we could share with our clients. So that's good to hear. Good to hear. Nicole, is there anything that the NCBFAA members can do to help with the ADEPT bill?
Well, as soon as we get our co-sponsors lined up and get ready to introduce it, we will do an outreach. And, I'd give a shout out to Leah Ellis and to Stephen Powell, who have been amazing chairs in helping us move this forward and helping to drive it. And what we'll do is we will put together a draft sample letter that members can send to their members and their members of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and asking them to support and or co-sponsor if possible. As I mentioned before, the feedback that we got from the Government Affairs Conference in September gave us a good idea as to those members who were interested in trying to work on this. So right now, as we build to get the initial introduction in both chambers, it's sort of, we've got to kind of build that first, unless there's any of the NCBFAA members have someone who, when they met with them or know them or their neighbor or whatever that's a member of Congress, that has said, yeah, let me know, I'll do this, I'll help sponsor it. Get that information to Leah, Steve, and I. We'll reach out to them, try to get them on as original co-sponsors, and then we can try to move it forward. Just the way I know Ashley was saying, Congress right now is being very deferential. He's absolutely right to the administration. But I will say there's a whole lot of murmuring going on and growing dissatisfaction with the problems that we're seeing, which I think knew were probably going to happen, of inflation, of the cost of things, of affordability. I do think, I do the legislative part, so there is politics in everything I say. But, the elections that were held in November, where the Democrats really seized on the concept of affordability, hit home with a lot of members. The other thing is, because the House of Representatives was out of session for a month and a half, 6 weeks almost, those members were in their districts and they were getting an earful every single day about the affordability. Now, the Democrat members, most of them it may have been theater, but they were coming to D.C. and working in their offices. But a lot of the Republicans stayed in their districts and were subjected to a lot of the feedback from their constituencies. And I think that they've come back with a little bit of a different position. I think they're trying to grant the administration as much of a runway as they can, but they are getting to the end of that runway. And that's why I think that we could see in 2026 maybe some pushback. You may know, or you may not know, that there were in the Senate, there were 3 measures that were brought forward under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, where if a member of Congress brings forward a provision to cancel the declaration of an emergency, there is a timeline. Within 15 days, the committee must report it out to the full Senate, and within 3 days, calendar days, the full Senate must hold a vote. There were 3 measures that were introduced: one to cancel the emergency with respect to Canada and fentanyl border, another with respect to Brazil, and another with respect to the overall reciprocal tariffs. All 3 of those measures passed. There were a handful, plus 1 or 2, Republicans who sided with all the rest of the Democrats to say, we don't think these emergencies should be in place. And that's a reflection of their constituencies talking to them about, these things are getting out of hand. It's too much money. It's hurting our manufacturing. It's hurting me at the grocery store. All of those factors playing into it. So I do think that we're going to see some changes in the members of Congress, in their tones, and we may be able to get more people on board. So if you hear about this, if your members involved and interested, let us know. We'll reach out to them. And as I said, once we get it introduced, we're going to send out a note, have everybody send it to their members of Congress, get on board and push these things forward. So we'll appreciate that help.
We will definitely promote that for sure. Ashley, do you see the current administration, maybe next year, having a higher interest in dealing with FMC regulations and enforcement?
Very good question, Laurie. And I think to answer it, we have to go back a little bit. So the prior administration, frankly, even going back to Trump 1.0, there was a heightened sense of the FMC's capabilities vis-a-vis primarily U.S.-Sino relations. So it became another tool in Mr. Trump's toolbox again, the first time around. Then, of course, the pandemic hit, supply chain disruptions initially, and then the huge spike in volume primarily coming out of China, which you all know better than we do, resulted in further disruptions and chaos, as well as rate instability. That resulted in passage of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022, which then President Biden signed into law. That was one of the very few hugely bipartisan pieces of legislation to move through that Congress. That favors the shipper side of the equation. I think we all know it provides additional opportunities for a shipper to raise concerns, fast track potential violations from a carrier, including NBOs. So obviously it cuts both ways in terms of the membership here at NCBFAA. But that's a good illustration of how the Biden White House embraced the FMC in ways that, frankly, historically it had not been. It's becoming, in my opinion, a more consumer protection agency. Oddly enough, in this environment with the new Trump administration back in power, where there is a de-emphasis on consumer protection issues in general, think our friends over at the consumer protection agencies. The FMC, I think, does have a role to play here. We did see that also in the context of the USTR Section 301 investigation and then findings and then initial implementation of the so-called ship tax with regards to China owned, operated, built, as well as third-party ro-ros in addition to the Chinese focus. FMC played a, if you will, subject matter expertise role with regards to USTR's investigation, refinement of that final action, etc. We do have some vacancies, at least on paper. 2 spots that are open, those are Republican appointees, and we do have 2 nominees that are making their way through. By all indications, and Nicole may speculate on this one better than I, but I think there's still a chance that we may have confirmation of the 2 Republicans. These are 2 individuals coming out of the state of Florida, both very close in orbit, politically speaking, to the president, as we understand. Limited background when it comes to our industry, and in particular, when regards to the intermediary sector, broker, NBO, forwarder, etc. So we do need to get in front of both of them and introduce ourselves. That is a top priority once they take office. I do think they'll be in office, if not, but between now and the end of the year. I would say early Q1 of next, once Congress returns for the new year. That will then create a Republican majority at the FMC. Technically today we have 2 Dems and 1 standing Republican, and that is the longest standing commissioner, and that is Rebecca Dye, who's now entering year 20 plus as a member. We'll see how long she continues to serve at the pleasure of the president, but for now, she's there. So to answer your question, I do think that this administration recognizes the role that the FMC can play on a variety of different trade-related fronts. They're also hearing from stakeholder associations, predominantly from the shipper side. Carriers are trying to strike a balance through their trade association primarily, as well as individually, as to the value that they add, recognizing, of course, that they don't necessarily have the political high ground that they used to in this city. That has clearly shifted to the consumer of ocean transport, i.e. the shippers, as well as arguably NBOs and forwarders to an extent. So having said all of that, I think we also need to be very mindful from the NCBFAA perspective that we are still in a very enforcement-focused mindset at the FMC. Just recently, there was a $1.3 million penalty imposed on Hyundai Merchant Marine, and that was not for detention or demurrage. Most of these multi-million-dollar penalties that we have seen recently that have been dumped on carriers have been focused around the D&D side. This one, however, is focused on the classic concerns of not adhering to contract rates, i.e. service contract rates, or tariff rates. That's something that hits home to NBOs as well. And it's a reminder that if we don't carefully follow the adherence requirements in the Shipping Act and the FMC rules to the governing rate, meaning in your tariff or an NRA or an NSA, then you could be subject to FMC enforcement You could also be subject to overcharge complaints, concerns from your own shipper customer, which is a different parallel concern. So long way of saying, I do think that this is an environment where the FMC remains valuable from an enforcement perspective. It's being utilized in non-traditional trade ways that we haven't seen in the past, at least not within the last, I'd say, 10 to 15, 20 years. And then we're going to have 2 new Republican members that are going to add a new sense of dimension to the commission. So questions as to where they want to take it. We don't have a chair. That's the other thing that's going to happen once these 2 new members are confirmed and in office. I would say one of them will probably be appointed as chair. Not quite certain who, and I'm not going to speculate, but I do think it's going to be one of the 2 new Republicans coming out of Florida. So stay tuned. I would say that as a closing comment, the commission itself is in a state of flux. Like every other agency, it did get hit, not necessarily by the DOGE, but it definitely got hit by the fork in the road. So prior to all of that, we were hovering at around 160 total numbers of employees, which is extremely small for the agencies that this association deals with. Clearly, it's not customs by any stretch. But frankly, the FMC never really was a huge agency, even at its high watermark if you go back to the 1970s and 1980s. So we're now down even below that number. Not quite certain where. I will not speculate, but they did lose a lot of subject matter expertise, as other agencies have. Cindy alluded to it earlier in her comments on the RAC side too. So we need to keep that in mind. It's a small agency operating even smaller with limited resources as well as budget operating capabilities. Hence, I think a huge focus on enforcement. And even though when they derive these penalties like the HMM 1.3, it doesn't go directly to the FMC, it's still a win politically for when the next chair goes up to talk to oversight on the House and Senate side and argues why it still needs to be well funded, et cetera. So in short, I think there is a role to play. I do think that this administration will further embrace the capabilities of the FMC in ways that are atypical, as well as push on it to enforce the traditional Shipping Act requirements.
Thank you. And my last question is for you, Lenny. How can brokers prepare for the more enforcement-minded aspects that we're seeing? What can we do as customs brokers to be ready and maybe try to hold it off in 2026?
So first, I want to revisit some of the comments my colleagues were making with regard to vacancies. For example, Ashley, you said FMC, we need to fill those. And Cindy, you were indicating the PGAs. As we know, there's been just literally an exodus of folks. Although we see some of that at CBP, CBP is very strong, if not stronger than ever. And as probably all of you have seen, they continue to recruit, they continue to build, they have the funds to do that. So as far as enforcement goes, they do have the man or the people power to initiate that. But I want to twist your question around a little bit, Laurie. I think it's not only enforcement, but I think that importers and brokers also need to have a thought process with regard to an offensive as well as a defensive. And we're seeing that right now before our very eyes, for example, with the IEPA case, before the SCOTUS. And the big question right now, timely this week, is what do we do to preserve our refunds? And I think this is very emblematic of the fact that importers, in conjunction with their brokers, they need to go into their ACE accounts. And I reiterate, I underscore, I highlight every importer of record in this country, and I'll say a meaningful material importer of record in this country should have an ACE account and know how to issue reports from their accounts. You would probably not be surprised how many do not. And as we are being infiltrated with requests for protest or filings at the court, as we saw initiated by several dozen over the last week or so, one of which by a huge multinational retailer who we all know and love and shop at all the time, has raised the question, do I file protest? Do I go right into court and file under the I jurisdiction? Is that necessary? But you're only going to be able to really do that successfully if you're familiar with your ACE account, if you're going in to take advantage of those refunds, to find those opportunities. And folks, it's not only on the IEPA part, but in this coming year, as those protests are starting to become due, as those liquidations are ticking away, the 314 days plus the 180, maybe earlier than that if CBP has gone in with the 2829 or post-summary correction, it is so imperative not to miss those dates. You're not going to get another bite at the protest apple if you miss it. And I see, unfortunately, people are starting to miss it, or they're filing requests for further review that are insufficient. So I would say, one, look at your strategy in this coming year as to how you want to take advantage and position yourself for those refunds amidst the various ideas and options that are out there. But also, two, what are your other opportunities? Let's say, hypothetically, that the decision comes down and IEPA is here to stay, or there are not going to be any refunds. Were you involved with any USMCA claims where you try to file 1520D and CBP denied it? You have to go in and protest. Did you think that you qualified for the in transit rule or time of entry, but CBP said you didn't? You have to go in and protest. 32s galore. Maybe there are opportunities that you overpaid on the aluminum steel as opposed to underpaid. So I think there's that part of it. As far as the enforcement side goes, it really is incumbent on the brokerage community as well to make sure you've updated your terms and conditions. I'm going to go in that direction because we as well are getting calls because now the importers are indicating that maybe the broker missed an opportunity or maybe they didn't file things correctly, and importers going to the brokers as a result indicating to us, well, you know what, we look back and we never sent our terms and conditions over to that importer, or there's just not a link to it. This is not the time to be realizing that. This is not the time for that to happen because the stakes have never been higher. I've worked with this team before you on modernizing the terms and conditions. We work to update the powers of attorneys. Those terms and conditions have a very important provision in them. It's a limitation of liability to $50 an entry. If you don't have that in place, then it's going to be very hard for you to avail yourself of that opportunity to defend yourself in that regard. So that's the other part of it. And then finally, you really need to dive in, and importers and brokers alike need to conduct those internal compliance reviews. Why would you wait for customs to tell you by way of a 28, a 29, or worse yet, a letter of investigation that you have been misclassifying, that you were not valuing it properly? We know a lot of companies really were bamboozled who were taking advantage, legally so, of the e-commerce de minimis environment and just transitioning to DDP, delivered duty paid. That's my answer, non-resident importer. And I could tell you as we sit here today, a lot of those values, they're going to be undervalued to what CBP would expect. A lot of the classifications are going to be off. So as a result, you really need to get in there now. It maybe sounds like a bit of a broken record because we've been there, done it before, but now more than ever, you need to get in. You need to see what's under the hood. You need to kick the tires around before CBP does that and before it's too late for you to come on and disclose. And I think brokers are really going to have to play a key role here to encourage and remind their importers to do that. So they're not going to the broker this year and saying, why didn't you tell me I had this opportunity? Why did I miss it? I'm going to pin that on you. And as a result, you're going to have to play the defensive as opposed to the offensive. So I think there are some opportunities there. I think also that there are going to be some challenges. And I'll leave you with this. Just because customs is going to necessarily allege right out of the starting gate that there was fraud or even gross negligence or negligence, a lot of times you are able to counter that by way of putting your information together, able to show what occurred. Look, one of the first cases, landmark cases that we litigated in our firm was a situation where customs accused a Hong Kong tailor middleman of fraud. That actually went to court and was completely turned around to become the first sale rule. So what started out as a fraud investigation because an importer was using an earlier sale price from the manufacturer to middleman as opposed to the middleman to the importer as fraud was turned around to become the law of the land that now more than ever, and this is another piece of advice all importers should be looking at, to utilize first sale to legally declare a first value, which now has been heralded as the most compliant way and requiring you to dig into your supply chain to ensure you have supply chain security as well to lower your tariffs. So sometimes what might look like fraud on the surface actually could end up being a very plausible and appropriate way to structure your transaction. So think of that when you're going through looking at your ACE data and not necessarily putting yourself on the defensive, but also looking at the offensive as well.
I think that's all great advice. I do think it's important for brokers to encourage our import clients to sign up for their ACE portal accounts if they haven't. That's all the questions I have. I do want to thank my panel. They've been fantastic in all these answers for all these questions, and I've put them on the spot, and I really appreciate it.